Hello everyone! I hope that you're doing amazing wherever you are in the world. My name is Shikha and I welcome you to my channel. As always, I'm so grateful that you're listening, subscribing and commenting. I really appreciate the support. In this one, I wanted to answer a question that a person asked me. I don't actually have the name with me in my notes, but the question was about how to deal with angry outbursts. It's kind of ironic that the person is actually asking me this question because I was the queen of temper tantrums and the queen of anger, of angry outbursts in the past. My parents and my siblings still kind of look at me with a little bit of awareness because they're worried that I'm going to have one of those temper tantrums or angry outbursts and I'm just going to annihilate everything in front of me and I'm going to have a huge fight with them and they're going to be exhausted by it and I'm just going to repeat the drama that I'd repeated in the past. Thankfully, I don't do as much of that anymore. I don't think I have had any angry outbursts recently, which is to show that the work that I'm doing upon myself is actually working, but also it shows that my outlook on anger has completely transformed, which is what I wanted to share with you. I think as human beings, actually especially as females, we're told that emotions are bad. It's actually considered to be a negative thing to be an emotional woman. You know, a lot of people will use that as insult and use that in order to keep us into our boxes and not let us speak our minds or let us display our emotions as they are. Now, I'm not saying that we should just go around all over the place just displaying emotions as randomly and as openly as possible, but I am saying that emotions are not a negative thing. And you've probably read this in many different texts before, that emotions are there for a reason. They are a window into our soul. They're actually showing us something that we need to pay attention to, right? So fear is showing us something that we need to pay attention to. Anger is showing us something that we need to pay attention to. Any kind of emotion you look at is kind of showing you something. It's kind of pointing an arrow towards something that needs your attention. Because what happens mostly as human beings is that we become unconscious. We kind of move through the world in unconscious manners and we're kind of sleepwalking through the world, right? We're not really thinking consciously about things because we're lazy. We don't want to do all that stuff. It's hard to do all that work. But when we have ignored something for long enough, it does not stay under the surface anymore and it comes up bubbling to the surface as an emotion, right? And an emotion is very hard to ignore mostly for us. We can ignore it maybe for a little bit of time, but eventually it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, like the monster in the closet. It starts off like a little baby gnome and then all of a sudden it's this huge monster we can't ignore anymore. And so emotions are there to show us something, right? And anger particularly is a very useful emotion if we use it in the right manner. Anger shows us something in our lives that needs to be changed because it's causing us aggravation. Let me give you an example from my life because I think that'll be easier to understand. For the longest time, before I moved to Chiang Mai, before I moved to Thailand, I had a lot of anger in me, not against anyone else outside myself, but against myself. I kind of translated it as hate. I thought I hated myself, but it wasn't actually hate, it was actually anger. And I was angry with myself because I wanted to live a different kind of life from what I was leading. I wanted to follow my heart, my dreams, which is to write and to be location independent, but I was too fearful to follow those dreams, so I kind of just kept on staying in my comfort zone, being unconscious, sleepwalking through my life, and all of that made me extremely angry with myself. Obviously what happened was that instead of feeling angry against myself, because that's very difficult, I started feeling angry against other people, and that's where all those angry outbursts and all those temper tantrums came from. I would feel angry against my brother or my sister or my mom and dad because that was easy. It's easy to throw the anger at someone else, to lob it at them, than to feel it against yourself, because if you feel it against yourself, then you have to start answering the question, all right, why? Why am I angry with myself, right? And so I kind of pushed all the anger off on everyone, not only on my family members, but also my partners, anyone that I dated. I threw a lot of anger at them. All of my friends, I would throw anger at them as well. Any kind of random acquaintance, strangers, I would throw anger at them as well. It's a sign of how different my life is right now because these angry outbursts happen extremely rarely now, whereas back then they used to happen almost on a weekly basis, if not daily sometimes. Especially if I was PMSing, it was obviously magnified, right? So that was the point of the anger that I was displaying then, that I was ignoring then, was that I needed to look at it in order to realize I don't like the way I'm living. I don't like the way I'm being fearful. I don't like the way I am running away from my life. I didn't like the way I was running away from my dreams. I hated all of it, right? And so as soon as I started actually really paying attention to my anger, which is what I learned to do, especially through yoga and meditation, I realized that, yeah, it has a lesson for me. It's not just there for a random purpose. Nothing in the universe and nothing in your body or your emotional structure is random. Everything is there for a reason. It has a purpose. It wants to show you something. It wants to teach you something. If only you would pay attention to it, right? I mean, but obviously most of us are so fearful, and I was in the same boat. I am in the same boat still, where we just don't want to look at the reality. We want to, as I said, sleepwalk. We want to ignore it. We want to be unconscious. We want to run away from it. It's scary. It's difficult. It's not something that we want to do. It's easier to ignore it and douse ourselves with alcohol or sugar or carbs or shopping and just make ourselves unconscious, right? It's much easier to do that. I did that for the longest time. It was great, until I couldn't do it anymore. And then the anger became stronger and stronger and stronger until I could not ignore it anymore. And then I started asking the question, why am I so angry all the time? I have an amazing life. What is there to be angry about? Well, it was an amazing life, but it wasn't life for me. I had to change it in order to realize, right, okay, this is what I really want to live. This is how I really want to live. This is what I really want to do. And so once I changed it, all of a sudden, all that anger just dissipated. And it was actually quite fascinating to me how quickly, it was like a switch, like an on and off button, where I would be angry all the time. I started living the way I wanted to live. All of a sudden, the anger disappeared. I didn't have those angry outbursts anymore. Even my parents, even when they were poking and prodding at me, even when they're trying to trigger me, it was very difficult for them to bring that anger to surface, or bring any kind of anger to surface, because it wasn't there anymore. I wasn't living, there was nothing to poke at. There was nothing inside of me that they could trigger. Of course, there were other things they could trigger, but not that particular thing, right? And so I really want us as people, as individuals, to start looking at emotions as not like kryptonite, or it's not like a TNT. It's not a time bomb. It's not a ticking time bomb that we need to kind of stay away from or ignore or run away from. It's not something terrible. We're not terrible people for being emotional or having emotions. I know we've been told that since we were children. I was told all the time, stop being so emotional, stop being so emotional. And I always used to wonder, but why? It's a part of me. Why is it so bad to feel my emotions when they're obviously inside of me? Now, of course, I realize it's not a bad thing to feel it. It's only a bad thing when you ignore it and you kind of vomit it all over everyone around you, rather than feeling it yourself and understanding, what is the lesson here? Why am I feeling this emotion? What is it trying to tell me? Why am I feeling this emotion over something else? Why are you feeling anger, whereas some other person around you, maybe your wife or your partner or your sister, actually feels fear all the time? My mom feels a lot of fear. She's a fearful person in general, an anxious person in general. My sister is the same. She feels a lot of anxiety. I used to feel a lot of anger because of all the different things I displayed. Now I feel a lot of joy, but I also feel panic sometimes for the future and not knowing what's going to happen in the future. Every person has a different way of displaying their emotions. Every person has a different way of understanding themselves. Every person needs a different emotion to show them the right path, right? And so you don't need to berate yourself because you feel anger, versus someone who might feel fear, or versus someone else who just numbs themselves and doesn't feel anything, right? It's not necessarily a negative thing to feel one emotion over another, but it's important for us obviously not to ignore it and to actually really go deep within it. I've done videos on this in the past where I tell you to lean into your emotions, not to run away from it, but to lean into them. If you're feeling an emotion, if you have the time and the space, if you're not around someone or you're not driving, if you can, just sit with it. Feel it in your body. Let it simmer in your inside of yourself. Let it tell you what it wants to tell you, right? Journal with it if that works for you. I journaled a lot when I was feeling a lot of anger in the past. I still journal a lot, but I deal with other emotions based on that. And so I'm always kind of trying to lean into it rather than running away from it. Of course, there are moments where I do run away from it and I use sugar or carbs. Basically, I eat a lot of chips. And I know when I'm eating a lot of chips that I'm trying to run away from some emotion that's inside of me. So I take it as a sign. I'm like, all right, okay, cool. I feel this random craving for chips. and I'll just sit there and eat a family pack of chips by myself, and then I'll realize, I see, so obviously I'm running away from something. That's my sign, that's my indicator. I'm sure you guys have your own indicators. Perhaps you start going online shopping and start buying all of these random things that you don't need. Or perhaps you start calling all of your exes and, you know, trying to get back together with them. Or perhaps you start getting angry with your siblings or your children. You start yelling at them, or your husband, or things like that. You start finding fault with people. There's all these different things that we do in order to run away from the emotions that we're feeling. Of course, my thing that I've told you before is, and I try to do this myself, is to lean into it, to understand what the lesson is. So don't deal with your angry outbursts by ignoring them. Lean into them. Try to figure out what the lesson is. Try to figure out, what is your anger trying to tell you? What is the path that you should be taking, or the lesson that you should be taking that you're ignoring, that you're numbing yourself against, that you're becoming unconscious about? And as soon as you have that lesson, as soon as you have that input, your anger will dissipate. It literally is as quick as that. So I hope this helps. This is already a really long video, so hopefully this is helpful. If you have questions about this, obviously comment below and I shall do a follow-up video. But in general, I think this gives a good gist of what I was trying to explain to you. Again, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate your support, and I shall see you the next time around. Bye for now.